morning. It's good to see you again today.
Good morning, James. Likewise, great seeing you as well.
So the topic for the day was I wanted to ask you, what are a few of the most common challenges that you encounter with organizations that are attempting to adopt less or believe they're adopting less?
Okay, and this is coming from the good faith that they actually want to improve something organizationally, right? Not because this is just another management
Well, I
threat,
would
right?
assume
Is
that they're
that right?
wanting to
Yeah.
improve, but you could ask yourself, what are they actually
Okay.
trying to improve? It isn't always.
So the question is, what are the biggest challenges or issues I've seen with organizations
Yes, sir.
attempting this genuinely, assuming genuinely? Yes. So at least one that comes to mind almost immediately is that, if we see multiple teams um, trying to sprint concurrently, also essentially being in the same feeding schedule on the same timer, trying to start and finish at the same time, the first question I will probably ask: are these even feature/product teams that work on the same product? If the answer is yes, then maybe it's a legit reason why someone wants to consider less or less huge. If the answer is no, they represent very different products, then the question would be, why then do you need to synchronize your sprint and cadence? Furthermore, in this, if these are not even feature product teams, if these are component teams or just delivery teams, and they don't deliver any potentially shippable product increment at the end, then even more obvious question would be, why do you need to be on the same schedule, on the same, sometimes referred to as an enterprise-wide schedule? Is it just to check the box and put all the ducks in a row and, cross the T's and dot the I's, or is there a very good reason why you're doing this? When you have a huge insurance company or pharmaceutical enterprise that does, 500 teams sitting on the same schedule, you wonder what's the good reason for that? Well, that's just one thing that comes to mind. I'll give you another one or two, and then maybe you can pause. You can ask me questions. I can give you a little more. Another challenge I've seen, and this is more of maybe a psychological pressure or peer pressure people have. We want to have less huge. This is our ultimate goal, and why? Well, because we're huge. We're a huge organization, we're a huge enterprise, so we must be needing a huge framework. And then, of course, actually another point I would like to make, they start introducing various terms that are used the less huge, but are totally inapplicable in a given setting. As I'm sure you would agree, as people that understand product development, we wish to keep things small as much as we can. And if we could get away with any product development just by using good old basic Scrum, we would. Going from
Basic Scrum, you mean
Scrum
just
to
single
consider
team Scrum, single team, not having lots of
yeah,
teams. Much better.
absolutely. Why
Yeah.
why make things overly complex? We would consider less, perhaps less huge, only if a product is big already and or is going to grow. And this is why you need to scale up goodness on one team Scrum, not because your organization is bloated, it's huge. That's actually a very bad reason to think scaling. You probably need to think descaling. And there was one more along the same lines, and then maybe we'll pause. Another challenge I've seen a lot is, again, maybe because terminology is not clear, or maybe intentions are not quite right. I've seen lots of attempts to stand up less huge for the aforementioned reason. We are huge. And then mislabel and misdefine requirement areas, as we refer to product requirement areas, by having only one, maybe two teams assigned to each.
Okay.
This
So just too narrow,
actually
too small.
leads to
Yeah.
very narrow areas, and this typically leads to very solid org structures and scatter of knowledge, local optimization by individual teams that support respective requirement areas, and of course there was a big question: do you even have a real product defined? Because that's also a hint into
Gene,
something else. Most likely, these teams are not
I
product teams.
think I think that
Yes.
and the whole idea of these narrow requirement areas and the we want less huge are symptoms of the same underlying misunderstanding, which is, people think that less huge is good when it's actually a lesser evil. So the desire, obviously, is that from a less perspective, is that we wish to optimize for adaptability. And in order to do that, we need
Yes.
we need as many minds as possible working on a single product backlog. And the reality is, even an area product backlog is sort of a separate list, even though you try to keep it from being so. You try to keep it harmonized as much as possible and be part of the overall product backlog. But it is a separate list of a flavor, and it kind of becomes that if you're not careful. And then this overall awareness of the product, your individual teams lose that overall awareness, which negatively impacts adaptability. You're more likely to find yourself working in overly narrow product boundaries that turn into component teams, which is also kind of what you alluded to.
That's right.
But this whole thing about, less huge and overly a requirement area with only having, 2 or 3 teams are symptoms of the same underlying misunderstanding. I don't know if I articulated that do you have any highlight for that?
I think you did, and when you mentioned the even standing up and the next requirement area is almost like it's a natural minimal required evil we have to do. It's not because we want to do it; it's because we have to.
And why do we have to do it?
If this is the manager,
that would be a natural question.
And you have to justify it exactly.
But why would you not want? What is the problem? So our listeners may be asking, what is the problem with having too many requirement areas? Or sorry. Let me the other way. Sorry. Yeah. Why would you do it at all? Why would you ever have multiple requirement areas?
Oh yeah. So again, if we think of this in terms of why we even consider less huge, because our product has grown very big, then we typically do this because we have reached the maximum cognitive load of a product owner who is initially in charge of setting priorities on the first requirement area on the product, and to a large extent of developers themselves. Then it's like almost inevitable. We have to stand up another array and find another area product owner, so the workload is shared, and it's a minimum required silo, if you will, that we have to create. But of course, there are some dynamics to minimize its impact. I got 2 more. Sure. Just came to mind 2 more observations, if you would like, because the one is actually continuity of the other. In the same vein, speaking about less huge and organizational reasons why sometimes we see this happening. There's a misunderstanding that technology area or infrastructure area or architecture or shared huge platform is the same thing as requirement area. Not quite the same. A requirement area is defined around very large business requirements. And typically, the problem with this stems from the origin of what you mentioned before, calling component teams and delivery teams as feature teams or product teams. These are not the same. And therefore defining a product based on technology, creating these tiny arrays, microscopic almost arrays, and of course, if we're lucky, we actually would have maybe 1 or 2 siloed feature or product teams within it, which is also a problematic thing because they will be losing inside of the whole product. But worse yet, and more commonly so, I've seen component teams being assigned to those small arrays, just to check the box and put some ducks in a row and cross the T's and dot the I's.
So this gets back to the reasoning of a feature team. The reasoning of a feature team is to have all the skills and resources on the team to be able to, and this is even true, simple of basic Scrum, to be able to implement something of meaning for the business. And
Correct. Yep.
if you have these component teams, they're going to have lots of handoffs between each other.
Yep. And it's not uncommon, at least in my experience, to see tons of handoffs between requirement areas, which is another. It's like it's a dysfunction to the power, right? Not only do you have hard dependency between component teams within the same area, if such thing exists even, now you have the hard dependency between areas. Undermines the whole notion of Scrum and large-scale Scrum and less huge. And one more thing, it's actually, this is the funny one, and this probably to some extent, because people get confused with terminology or maybe don't spend enough time to really understand and learn what sits behind the terms, which may seem to be a trivial thing, but it's really not when you have relationships, dynamics, and many other things, organizational things that sit behind the terms. Mislabeling a requirement area, which is essentially a product or a large business requirements area, if you put those, the prefix in large square brackets, confusing it and relabel it into something like an area product. So instead of calling it a product requirement area, they call it an area product. What it brings along is actually almost like orthogonal definition. I usually use the analogy of, take New York City, and it's got 5 boroughs. So if city is a product, then Manhattan Island would be a very large business requirement area that supports certain rules, regulations, and other. If you flip the terms and think of tri-state area as an area, then New York City, as the whole New York City, will become an area city. So it completely reverses fundamentally reverses the language, and because of that, understanding of what a product and what's a large business area of a product gets confused.
Gene, this even ties into our conversation about training, and that to ensure that you take training from someone who fundamentally understands what's being asked, and it just gets distorted when you have a lower quality of training.
I can disagree more. I cannot agree more with you, because it's actually more difficult to unteach and uncoach and untrain than to deliver authentic and appropriate learning from.
So, Gene, this has been great. I think we should probably wrap at this point.
Sure. Yeah, that was a good conversation, James. I appreciate your.
Thank you. I thought so too. So the Les with Gene and James podcast is available on the Agile Carpentry Spotify channel, also on the Agile Carpentry and the Adaptive Ecosystems YouTube channels. Furthermore, Gene and I routinely post these videos on our respective LinkedIn profiles as well. Thank you for your time today, and hope you have a wonderful day.
James, same to you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as always.